Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a science communicator here in Reading, and I'm here with Sadie from Feathers and Furs Falconry Centre in Reading, and Bourneville, our lovely little kestrel, who we're going to be talking about today. So, Sadie, can you introduce us to what Feathers and Fur is all about?
Perfect. So Feathers and Fur is a falconry centre, and our key kind of basis is always education. So we really love catching children's imagination with the birds of prey, so they fall in love with their environment and understand exactly how everything works and how everything fits in.
So you've got Bourneville here, who's a lovely kestrel. Who's his kind of extended family here at the centre?
Bourneville is what's called a parent-reared bird, so actually he doesn't have any physical family at the centre, but we've had him since he was about 8 weeks old and has been with us ever since. He is currently 7 years old now, so he's a fair old age for a captive bred kestrel.
How long do they normally live for then?
In the wild, there are very few that actually get up into their teens. About 4 or 5 would be a really good age for them. In captivity, I know of one that's nearly 20, so big dedication when you take on a captive bred bird.
Yeah, so he's sort of middle-aged then.
Yes,
at
very
the
distinguished
moment.
Gentleman that he is.
He's doing well.
Yes.
So tell us a bit more. Where does the kestrel fit into the bird of prey family tree, as it were?
Perfect. Okay, so in the UK, the kestrel is one of our 4 falcon members. Obviously, we have the peregrine falcon, the kestrel, and then we have the hobby and the merlin. Both of those are very rare to see, though, so they fly over from Africa in the springtime. So this is the one, however, that most people are familiar with. You know, they might not know very much about him, but as a bird of prey, he's probably the most kind of in your face, kind of see him as you're driving down the road. So more people know the kestrel than something like, say, the peregrine falcon, which is a bit rarer of a sight now.
So the kestrels have this amazing way of hunting when you can normally see them at the side of the road, where their heads are perfectly still and their whole bodies are kind of doing this movement.
Perfect,
thing.
yeah. So he's called the wind hover as one of his kind of nicknames, and it's because he's the only bird of prey that we have in the UK that can hold a perfect hover. So like you said, the head stays perfectly still, but the wings are kind of rotating in a small circle. And usually for a falcon, you can see that he's got a really long tail, and he actually uses that as almost a third wing. So as he's moving his wings around, his tail's helping give the uplift, and his whole body kind of stays stationary. No matter how strong the wind is, he can do it head first into the wind, or on a completely calm day just hold that hover perfectly. And it's only him that will hover, so lots of people kind of question whether he might be a sparrowhawk. That's the other bird that's very similar to him, but never. A sparrowhawk just wouldn't hover. It's just not in its nature. Too much effort.
I was going to say, even with him sat here now, you can see this longer, this sort of, as you described, the third wing is sat there. Even when he stood still, was he using it as a balancing?
Yes, yeah. So you can see if I tilt my hand and show him up, he moves his tail in and out to keep his balance.
It's very sweet. I'm thinking, what am I doing? So obviously we're looking at his markings. Got beautiful markings. Are this distinctive of the falcon family?
So this is a male kestrel sort of marking. So obviously the hobbies and falcons and the peregrine, they all vary. So the colouring is very unique to him. I'm sure if I bring him a little bit closer. As a male, you can see he's got this beautiful blue-grey tail and a really beautiful blue-grey head. The females are a third bigger, and they're actually just more brown, less of this beautiful rustic brown that he's got. The juveniles look very similar to a female. When he was a baby, though, we knew he was definitely a boy, because even as a baby, he still had a really nice tinge of blue in his tail and in his head. But yeah, males look very different, females look very similar to juveniles, but girls are always bigger. That's the kind of key when you're looking up. The size is a huge thing, but at 7 ounces, everything looks tiny.
I was saying when we were looking compared to the buzzards that you've got in the centre, I always expected the kestrel to be, I don't know, maybe more this size, a bit bigger, but actually they are quite petite.
I think because most people, when you see him, the human eye is really difficult to get size. Like, you know, you see him sitting on a telegraph pole or kind of when he's sitting on the wire, the perspective is really hard for the human eye to understand. And obviously the most common way to see him is flying. So of course he's going to look bigger because he's got his wingspan open, and he's got a really big, I don't think we can make him open his wings too well.
Oh, there we go.
He actually has a really big wingspan, obviously designed to give him lift. So he's much bigger. Oh, have a rest. With his wings open than he is when he's sitting like this. He looks very dinky.
I was saying, just talking about, obviously our eyes are incredibly different to the kestrel's eyes, and we can't do that with our neck either, turning it all the way round. So I know we've got here a kestrel skull, just bring it up to the screen. So actually you can see they've got this really big eye socket in comparison, if you think, compared to...
The size of his head.
Yeah, compared to Bourneville, bless him. So talk us through that. Why do they have such big eyes in comparison to the rest of their head?
Okay, so as a raptor, so a bird of prey or a bird that uses its feet in order to catch its food, vision for him is one of the key things. Within some birds, like say the owls for instance, some of the owls use hearing. His ears are covered by the feathers, so his hearing is not brilliant, but for him the vision is the key. So when you see him hovering up in the sky, he's hunting. So he doesn't hover for mating or for territory, he's just purely hunting. And he has chosen that specific spot. It's a like, this is where I'm hovering. At that point he's hovering small mammals, so they play a huge role in his diet, the sort of field voles, and he's chosen to hover there because his vision goes all the way up into the ultraviolet spectrum, and he's actually looking at mousewee. Which I just find the most phenomenal skill. He can track mouse urine through the grass. As the mouse walks, it wheezes continuously, and that's what he's looking at as he's hovering. He's looking for the fresh trail, because fresh trail equals mouse.
So that's completely different to how the human eyes
see
we don't work.
Yeah, we don't see up into that ultraviolet. Lots of birds see into the ultraviolet spectrum, but the kestrel is one of the few that actually utilise it as a hunting technique. For others, like the starling for instance, they have that lovely iridescence on their feathers, so to us that looks very pretty, but under an ultraviolet light it looks even better, and so it's a kind of look at my feathers, look at my pattern sort of show.
A bit of showing off
Yes.
there. So I'll say one of the reasons that we're talking about Bourneville and kestrels today is because there's a worry about their decline. And I know that you were saying that voles are a good food source, and that's very common with owls as well, but we're not seeing such a decline with some owls as we are with the kestrel.
Yeah, for the kestrel he's very adaptive. I mean, he quite happily go and eat some worms and some beetles and some bugs, but the field vole plays a massive role in his diet, as it does to the barn owl. So 80% of barn owl's food is mice, voles and shrews. The decline for these guys has been charted almost since the 60s, so for them they weren't quite as affected by DDT as something like the peregrine falcon was. So DDT was a pesticide used over the farmland to manage obviously the insects, and it built up in the food chain to create soft shell syndrome in the predators, and for him, yes, it had an impact, but it wasn't as big. We lost nearly 50% of the peregrines in the UK because of DDT. For these guys, it's been really since the 70s that their decline has been really noted, down to changes of agriculture, so mass industrialisation on agriculture, big fields, ripping out the hedgerows, taking away a lot of the winter stubble. So now we use oilseed rape instead to kind of put over in a field. Well, if you ever go and look at a winter field with rape in it, it's very bare and very barren, which means it's not good for the small mammals, or for the insects and then the small mammals, and therefore you don't get the predator. So there has been a lot of ideas behind this decline. No one can actually prove why they're declining at the moment, but the big kind of theory is the changes of agricultural practices, and then that coupled with nesting. That's one of the biggest projects that people have been working on, is creating nest sites for these guys.
So we were saying, so we've got a nest box, a kestrel nest box behind us, and these are quite different to what you get, for example, like a barn owl box, which I know a lot of people have been actively putting up to help the barn owls, but that isn't any good for birds such as Bourneville, is it?
No, so obviously the Barn Owl Trust is one of the single biggest charities for birds of prey. It's huge, and there's lots of people, I'd love to help an owl, and you go on and you Google, we use your search engine to find how to build an owl box, and the first people that are going to come up is a barn owl box. And barn owl boxes are designed very much so with a hole at the top. Baby barn owls don't come out of the nest until they're fully fledged, till they look like an owl, so they can jump up and out of the hole. Kestrels come out fairly young. We've got some, probably can't see very well, but some pictures of some sort of almost fledglings kind of sitting around, and they can't get out of a high box hole. And so these boxes are designed with a nice little low shelf in them, which the kestrel can use, but also a barn owl would use as well. So we're building boxes for one species, but actually if we built something like this, it's a bit kind of multi-use. And so for these guys, the Hawk and Owl Trust have been doing a really fabulous project where they've been putting up boxes alongside roads. Roads are really important hunting habitats for a kestrel, not for the roadkill, but for the grassland that runs alongside. And they've been putting up owl boxes kestrel boxes, every mile, and they've seen a really good marked increase in the use of them and therefore their numbers, which is fabulous. So I think that, coupled with good management for agriculture and nest boxes, would be a good thing for the kestrel.
So I'll say it's not just the barn owls on that aspect of nesting. In the wild, they sort of live in tree hollows and other things where we typically find the grey squirrel as well. So that's causing a bit of an issue.
Yeah, for these guys, I mean, look at the size of him. He is never going to compete against something like a grey squirrel. And tree hollows are really prime retail estate. The grey squirrel lives in them. More recently in our area, the parakeets will go into them. Health and safety means for a lot of not every tree has a hollow in it, and so we're sort of pulling down the old rotten ones in case they fall on someone camping underneath it. And so for these guys, they really struggle to find that really good nest site. They will quite happily take on a crow's nest, but the worries for that are things like chicks falling out or eggs falling out. Last year, I actually, from just down the road, rescued 2 fledglings who had been blown out. We had a big storm, and they were nesting on a crow's nest, which was right at the very, very top of this tree. There was no chance of us getting them back up there. So yeah, it's a worry. Nest boxes are the safer option, I think, for these guys. So we have been putting up, as you can see, we've got one. We've been putting them up in the local area.
But these birds do struggle, don't they? You were saying earlier that actually there's a really high mortality rate between the sort of first and second year of life for
first
them.
and second year kestrels really struggle, and most of it's down to starvation when you see them. So going off and finding a territory, being pushed out of your territory by your parent, once you're old enough and mature enough to go off and look after yourself, you do get pushed out of your territory, and you have to go off and find somewhere else. And obviously in the winter months that is very difficult. So they do find there's a nice correlation. If you get a lovely early spring and the birds are able to nest and breed earlier in the year, then the babies have got a better chance of surviving the winter. But if you get like this year, we had quite a long winter. The breeding time was quite late, therefore mortality this winter may be fairly high. So the trouble with the kestrel is no one's really doing many studies into it. It takes a long term. You can't just guess on 1 year. So the Hawk and Owl Trust study has been running since I think since early 2000s, and they have to go for a number of years. You can't just guess on last year's numbers. So yeah, it's going to take a while, but fingers crossed, because they're such a beautiful British bird, such an iconic British bird, aren't they?
They are. So they definitely, especially not even in rural roads, but down, as you said, down the side of motorways, dual carriageways, you do see with that distinctive hover. You can't help. I know I get distracted when I'm driving. I'm like, oh, what's that bird doing? What's he seen?
I'm not doing 70 miles an hour on the motorway.
But he's looking, and they are stunning, and yeah, again, surprisingly small, but quite powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
So is there anything apart from putting up kestrel boxes, is there anything else that we can do to help birds such as Bourneville?
Mostly it would be down to things like managing land, suitable land. So leaving areas of unmanaged grassland, which is one of those kind of double entendres I always say. You have to manage unmanaged grassland. You have to cut it every couple of years, or you have to, you can't just let it go to thistles and brambles. So you do have to manage areas, putting up the nest boxes, managing the land, monitoring. So if you see a kestrel, you can actually inform the Hawk and Owl Trust, so they've got a good idea of numbers. They are a widespread bird. They're found globally. However, they are amber listed in the UK, which means that they are an at-risk species. So the more we can do, the better for them, I think. It would be such a shame to lose this beautiful bird.
Yeah.
British shores.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for yours and Bourneville's
very
time
welcome.
today. He's been well behaved.
He's a very good boy.
Maybe an extra vole for lunch.
Mouse for dinner.
Very lovely. Well, thank you very much, Sadie,
Brilliant.
and
Thank
hopefully we can keep on saving these beautiful kestrels. Even got a little nod there to go, yes, we need to carry on saving me.